I look back at some of the hardest stuff, some of the stuff where I took real hits, for taking positions, and I see the change. And that is something you only get as an executive director.
Hi, my name is Megan Jensen, and I'm the Director of Programs for the American Theater Wing, and I'd like to welcome you to the Network for Emerging Leaders in the Theater. The network bridges information and access for emerging theater leaders by providing conversations, insight, connections, and networking opportunities for young professionals interning and working in theater administration roles, both artistic and executive. You can support the American Theater Wing and help us continue to provide free resources like this conversation today to the next generation of arts workers. There is no donation too small. We're sending a link right now via the chat, so you can go ahead and give us a donation or make a contribution by visiting us at americantheaterwing.org. And now it is my ultimate pleasure to introduce our own president and CEO and moderator of tonight's panel of the American Theater Wing, Heather Hitchens.
Thank you, Megan. And hello, aspiring theater leaders. It's so great to be in this virtual space with you and to be with these other women leaders. I'm really excited to introduce you to them. So without further ado, Jennifer Bielstein, Executive Director of the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, California. Please come on and say hello to our guest out there in cyberspace.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
And Tiffany Gavin, Executive Director of the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center in Waterford, Connecticut. Yay!
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. Hello.
And Sheila Lewandowski, right here in Long Island City, right? In the Executive Director of the Chocolate Factory Theater, right here in Long Island City, New York. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Teresa Coleman Wash, Executive and Artistic Director of the Bishop Arts Theater Center in Dallas, Texas. We've got the country covered pretty well here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. We have a group, as you heard Megan introduce, of young aspiring theater leaders. Some people are working in the theater already, some are interning, and some are students. And one of the things that I think is always interesting is to hear, how did you get where you got? What was your journey? I'm going to start with Teresa.
Again, my name is Teresa Coleman Wash. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for the Bishop Arts Theater Center in Dallas, Texas. We were chartered in Atlanta in September of 1993. And we were doing dinner theaters in a blighted area of town. I got in the industry because, well, I've always been on stage, but I saw Diana Ross, I'm dating myself, in The Wiz years ago, and completely changed my life. I always knew that I wanted to be in theater. And so the area where I was living and working in Atlanta was a cultural desert. And so I decided to form a nonprofit organization, nonprofit theater. We were doing dinner theater performances at the Lakewood Playhouse, which was a dilapidated union building that some friends renovated and gave me keys and autonomy to do whatever I wanted to do. So completely self-centered. I thought that I could write and produce all of my plays. And that's what I did in Atlanta. I got married in 2000, and something interesting happened. One of our longtime patrons who had followed our progress called me up and said, I have a 10,000 square foot building that I want to donate to your nonprofit. And that changed everything, because as we were kind of talking before the Zoom, property ownership has been a game changer for us. But I've spent many days cleaning out the toilets, mopping the floors. I naively got in this business thinking I would write and produce all my plays, but what we do now more so than anything else is create opportunity for other artists. And I think that's one of the reasons why the theater has grown the way that it has. We impact over 50,000 people annually worldwide. for the pandemic, that number has certainly grown. We've helped propel the career of so many artists who cut their teeth on our stage. And we just paid off our construction loan debt with the SVOG money. So, I mean, I'm excited about where we are.
Fantastic. And I'm going to come back to this because I have a feeling several of us started as artists and ended up as CEOs, and just talk a little bit about what that transition, I'm going to say, is like, because it is and is. Sheila, tell us your journey.
I am also an artist, I will say. I perform for the stage now and not on the stage. And I started my journey in founding this theater, and we now own a building. It took us 10 years to get the city of New York to buy one for us, which was no easy feat. Was as a child growing up in public housing, where my mother did performances at the community center. And she had us civically engaged with the arts in the community in all different ages and cultures. And that, continues throughout my whole life. And so I've always believed in the power of art and the power of live performance, and how it can bring people together to help us to bring issues, good and bad, and work through them. And so I wanted to perform, but I've always remained civically engaged on the community board, and I was still producing, and I was still writing. And in the end, I founded this, and I am excited to support other artists, as you were speaking about, Teresa, and giving them the opportunity and commissioning them and giving a place for them to sink their teeth in. I'm not going to say break their teeth. I almost did, but I don't want that to happen. But also for the community to have ownership of this, for the neighbors here to have a pride of place in their community. So that's a real tight summary, but I've run a camp. I run another youth service agency of clean toilets, clean the sewer outside. That's our responsibility. You can't be squeamish. And so that's a quick summary.
All right. So moving on from that to Jennifer.
My family, we moved around the country a lot growing up, and we moved my junior year of high school to Houston, and I fell into the drama class and fell in love with theater. Just fell in love with theater, with the community, the collaboration, and was never an artist, and worked behind the scenes, assistant directed. Well, I guess directing is an art, I shouldn't, but I assistant directed, I stage managed, and but knew my interests were in supporting this art form, and went to college at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and studied business and theater. And somehow at that point in time, I don't really know exactly how, but I heard that there was something called a managing director. And I'm like, oh, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do in theater. And so studied business and theater in Chapel Hill. When I graduated, I'd read a lot about Chicago theater. And so moved to Chicago and worked at a restaurant at first, and then worked for a small theater company where I did some house management and worked in the box office and coordinated their young audiences program. And then I ended up in a marketing role at Northlight Theater. And so my career evolved up through marketing. And we were talking earlier about the importance of revenue generation in these jobs and how critical it is. And I think one of the things that I always think about in my career evolving was that I knew that I wanted to be a managing director of a major regional theater whose work I believed in. So I would tell people that. So I was in a marketing role, but my mentors, people who believed in me, knew that that's what I wanted ultimately. So when a job became available, they recommended me for it. And so I took my first executive director job at Writers Theater in the Chicago area, and then have moved into other roles since then as it has evolved. The other thing that I always think about as my career evolved is that I identified my gaps for moving into whatever the roles were that I needed, and I would find ways to get that learning or experience that I needed for it to evolve. So I knew that I would need to, I did go to, I studied business in undergrad, of course, but, I wasn't an expert in reading financial statements. So I found ways to audit a class and take a seminar. And I knew that I would need to understand how it was to be a board member, because I'd be working for boards of directors. And so I volunteered for a small theater company in Chicago to be on their board and learn it that way. So I always think those steps are important as my career developed.
I
I
think
think
it's
that's
so,
as succinctly as I can say it.
that is great. And there's some really good stuff in there. Like you knew what you wanted to do. And I think one of the missions we have at the American Theater Wing is to introduce young people to the many ways that you can have a great life in the theater, and so we want more people to know, hey, I could be a managing director. Hey, I could be an executive director. And, just that there are so many different ways to have a life in the theater. Yes, and being a board member is a good thing. We should come back to that too, because I have done that, and I like want to break out in hives, and when I'm not in the board meeting for the other executive director, I find myself going, no, like, protecting them, in that way. So it's like you should always have somebody who's your greatest protector and fan on your board. That we'll get back to that. And Tiffany, tell us your journey.
So I actually started when I was younger. My parents were educators, but my mother had been a music teacher. She was a music major in college. And they were always kind of into the arts, into performing, even once they had, sort of put that aside and gone into their professional careers. And I was an only child, and my parents decided that a really good way for me to open up and socialize and become more confident was to put me in an acting class. So when I was 6, I went into an acting class, and I really, just loved being around theater people. I loved just everything about it. I was always curious about this. I was in a makeup class, just all of the various things that were going on backstage. And when I was in college, I took an internship in a casting office at the Public in New York. And if you want to never be an actor, get an internship in a casting office. You learn things that you just don't want to know. And when I finally graduated from college, I ended up being offered a position as the assistant to the general manager at the Public. So that ended up being the sort of start to my career. And moving on from that, I went sort of the company management route. Mainly my background was in commercial theater as a company manager and a general manager, and then eventually as a producer. But like Jennifer, when I would find something that I needed to get a little bit more information in, I suddenly would end up taking a job. Someone said to me that I have such a strange resume because I went and I worked in licensing because I wanted to understand what that was about. And I worked for a corporate coaching firm because I wanted to kind of understand, how public speaking, came about. I knew that maybe someday I would be running something and I would want to feel confident about public speaking and running a board meeting or running a meeting, that sort of thing. So I had a number of different jobs, but I always sort of came back to the business side of things. And when I part of the reason that I was attracted to the position at the O'Neill actually is because it's sort of a different structure in that it's an executive director and 6 artistic directors.
Wow.
Yes. So we have an artistic director that runs each of our programs. We have an artistic director that runs our National Theater Institute, one that runs our puppetry conference, one that runs our musical theater conference, our new play conference, our Critics Institute, and our cabaret and performance conference. So it's a really great way to sort of, I think, it sort of took all the best parts of producing and allows me to do it in a mission-driven organization. So I really enjoyed working in the commercial theater, but there was really a part of me that wanted to work for something mission-driven, a more mission-driven institution. So getting to take all the parts that I really liked about commercial production and working really closely with an artistic staff and management, and also to get to do that for a mission-driven institution. So that was kind of my path.
That's great. And I think one of the important things to take away, because I think people worry a lot about what does their resume look like? Is it sequential? That it's the zigging and zagging that makes you a triple threat because you've done this, you've done that. There's your path is your path. And, so I was also an artist. I was a drummer, and this is my 4th executive director post. And yes, I started when I was 10. No, I started when I was 24. So, but but I would never have told any of you back then that I would be an executive director. It was not something that was necessarily on my radar screen. But after college, I needed to find a job, and somebody told me, "Oh, go to the American Music Theater Festival in Philadelphia." And I walked in there, and the producing director, who was quite a character, said, "You're a development person." And I was like, "What's that?" and they're like, "Raising money." I said, "Oh, no, 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 no. I'm not asking people for money." And then I realized, just to summarize quickly, that raising money is actually fun because it's about passion and follow through, and they're going to give their money to someone. Why not give it to the art that you want to make that's going to change the world? And then from there, I was just really kind of intrigued, about how the business side worked. And I want to sort of ask this question to those of you who are artists that are now, and I finally sort of came to terms with that I could have the soul of an artist and be a CEO, that I could do that. And those two things could coexist, and that would actually be an advantage. And it took me a minute to get there, but Sheila, what was your journey like on that front?
I completely agree. I actually think to be a really good entrepreneur, business owner, executive director, managing director, you have to also be artistic and creative. And today, when we're looking more at kind of the social justice issues in our firm, you have to be empathetic, you have to be open, you have to be vulnerable, you have to be transparent. And I think all of those things are very much aligned with being an artist. So for me, I was listening to everybody as an artist, as an actor, studying characters and script, all of that ties into being a good executive director. Know your audience. So know, like when you go to fundraise, who are you meeting with? What is their role? What are their interests? What are they able to do? What do you want? Those are all things we learned about as to be a good artist, to be an actor. For me, all of it tied in, and still does, and performing.
Yeah,
public speaking.
It is in many ways. And I don't think you have to be an artist to be creative and entrepreneurial. It's just for those of us that had that artistic journey, how do we, translate that? David Henry Wong, who just rotated as my chair, now Emilio Sosa is my chair. But David said about me as a drummer, he related me as a drummer that I'm setting the tempo for the whole organization. I'm driving it forward, and I thought that's true. That's what you do. So I think it is interesting. What about you, Teresa?
I was just writing down. My job really is about relationships. Prior to the when I was in Atlanta, one of the reasons why I was able to charter a theater was because I was working I sold broadcast advertising for the Disney company for an oldies format. And so I was, during the day, I was this radio sales executive. And at night I wrote plays and produced plays. But what I learned is from that job in sales is it really is about relationships with our elected officials, relationships with the philanthropic community, relationships with our audience. People give to people. They don't give to institutions. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn. I was listening to Jennifer and Tiffany, talk about how they knew that they needed to take these classes, to really excel at their jobs. Well, all of this just fell in my lap. I was so incredibly naive about everything. I feel like a lot of my job was kind of on the job training. We were not in a position to run a theater when our theater was donated to us. We really needed to build our audience. We had just moved to the Dallas area. We didn't have an audience. We had not built meaningful relationships with the philanthropic community. I didn't know who the players that be. All of it was just completely, I was just thrust into this position, and I had to make the best of what, the cards that I was dealt. And so, but in hindsight, when I think about all of that, The building that was donated to us was a dilapidated photography studio. It was a 10,000 square foot building that with some rundown lofts upstairs. We brought in an architect, told him what we wanted, raised $500,000 in private sector funding. We were able to get a construction loan for another $700,000, started the renovations in 2006, completed the renovations in 2008, just as the economy plummeted. So we had to find our way through all of that. But in hindsight, as I'm looking at what is happening with us, our current realities during the pandemic, that time really trained us. That 2008 economic downturn trained us for our current realities. And I feel like one of the reasons why we are successful in this moment is because of that experience.
You bring up such an important point. Is like sometimes we look back, it's nice to have experience, right? But sometimes we look back and we didn't have the experience and we realize, oh my God, we just did that. And and I think this notion of being a lifelong learner, no matter how, you're the president of this, it's like, what else can I learn? How can let me do the thing that I'm afraid of, and learn that. The only thing that I think experience, because I had my first executive director job when I was 24, just because I was the last person standing, I think and I remember being completely paralyzed trying to make a bunch of decisions, like union things. Like I was just sitting there and I called my father, who had been in corporate America, and he said, "Are you paralyzed?" And I said, "Totally." And he goes, "Well, you better get off the pot," he said. And he said, "You're going to make some good decisions. You're going to make some bad decisions. You better hope to hell your good decisions outweigh your bad decisions. You better be able to explain them all. Now call me when you have a real problem." And as harsh as that sounds, it was the most loving thing he could have done, because it is about trusting yourself.
That's right. It is. That's such a good point, Heather. And it's also about allowing yourself to make mistakes.
Yes.
I've learned so much from the mistakes that I've made than my successes.
So I think and I always try to do this too. Like one of the reasons I picked up adjunct teaching is I want my students to keep challenge me in things that I don't know already, so that I keep learning. But Jennifer, you talked about this. Do you still do this? Do you still reach out and take a class or do something? Do you still feel like you're learning?
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm learning all the time, and about things. I think there's been a through line about things that were unexpected. I mean, what I learned about, through COVID, well, many things, but we had real estate issues, right? And so I couldn't afford our rent, those sort of things, had to navigate that. And I'm learning all the time, I think. And I really, someone mentioned it, I think Teresa, you did, but about relationships, and relationships are so important. And I feel I have had the good fortune over the years to develop a lot of great relationships throughout the theater industry. And so you're also really able to learn from each other and turn to each other when you have questions and challenges and aren't sure what to do, because none of us are, inventing the wheel. Someone's been through it. And I think we're really collaborative as an industry and are willing to help each other. I mean, I help people in many ways that I don't know at all, right? And I've always found that people were willing to do that for me as I was developing my career. But yes, learning all the time.
I think that's so important, this idea, because I have people that I've talked to for 30 years, that I'm like, oh, still to this day, because we talked a little bit before we came on camera about how it can be a little bit lonely to be, in charge of everything and have it on your shoulders. So to have a colleague that you can call, and I still to this day have a kitchen cabinet of people that I'm like, I really don't know what to do. And people are so generous. And I hope, that I'm generous in return about saying, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So I think that's an important thing, is because I think people think if you become an executive director, you know it all. And, and it's not. We're still learning, and we get hit with things. COVID is the perfect example of, I think in terms of a skill set, and I want to get into that for our audience here, some of the skills that you think you need. This idea to be adaptable, to expect the unexpected. You're not to not expect that you're going to master this because something new is going to get thrown at you. Does anybody have examples other than COVID of something that got thrown at them that you just had to learn on the spot?
Well, so many.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like Teresa was talking about a building basically dropping in your lap and then having to figure it out. You know, we went through 10 years of trying to find a building, and this deal fell through and this deal fell through and this real estate developer wanted us, and it was just nonstop having to learn. I had to learn so much about real estate, and you know, space requirements, DOB, Department of Buildings, fire department, all of these things. I had to learn it on the spot. And there was not a lot of time not to learn it. I see you're shaking your heads. So
Yeah.
one example.
So being willing to learn, being willing to make mistakes, being willing to be vulnerable. Let's do a quick sort of round robin of skills. I'll call on each of you that you think you need, and then let's move into, because there's the skills of being the executive director, but then there's like this issue of what does it mean to be a leader? And I think this is particularly important at this moment in time. And so, and before we get to that, after we get to the skills, just what do you do to take care of yourself so that you can show up and be there every day? Because this doesn't get talked about enough in our industry, in terms of self-care, what you need to do in order to show up and lead, and be the person with everything, where everything's on your shoulders. So we'll just do a quick round robin of skills. Just name the three top skills you think an executive director needs. We'll start with Tiffany.
Well, one of the things that I have learned in the executive director position is that I had to learn how to talk about the arts to people that have absolutely no idea what we do for a living. So it is a huge part of, when you're talking to civic leaders or politicians or funders, and just finding a way of communicating your vision, communicating about your institution, communicating about what theater is and why you need the things that you're asking for, being able to, I realize that a lot of us spend a lot of time around other theater people all the time, and we have a shorthand, we understand what we're talking about. And then as an executive director, you really have to go out and explain that to people that really don't have a whole lot of necessarily the kind of knowledge about what you do as you do, and the people that you're used to talking to. So
that's a really good one. And you don't have to have three. One good one is good. And that's a really good one. So Jennifer.
Yeah, I had one that's similar to that. I mean, I think that relationship building, I think it's a key part of the role. Relationships externally, internally, and doing that, you're doing that to get people excited about the work that you're creating at your organization. So I think that's hugely important. And I think you have to have an interest in being willing to juggle a lot of different things and have a variety of work styles. So some elements that are very social, sometimes you're crunching numbers in a spreadsheet, sometimes you're writing something, you have to have an interest in that, and an acceptance maybe that things aren't always going to be really predictable in your day to day.
Sheila.
I don't know if this is a skill, but the number one thing I think is you need to know and or accept what you don't know and get help. So team playing, because maybe you're not great at math, but you're an incredible communicator and someone who's charismatic and people want to follow. So know that you don't have that skill and get that help. Listening, communications, super, super important to, what Tiffany was saying is like, if I have to communicate to these people this way and these people this way. So those are kind of the biggest things, I think, for me.
I think that's getting help. I think people realize, they think once you're the boss in some way, that if you say you don't know how to do something, that you're going to be judged. What I've found, and maybe it was because I was very young when I started, is that people are always really generous when you ask them that, can you help me? Because nobody's perfect. And they're always flattered. So I think that's really important to young people coming in, knowing, and if you're going to make mistakes, somebody said that mistakes happen, just own them, ask for help, or even better yet, if you think you're going to make a mistake, ask for help, because I have found in my experience, you don't get punished for that, that people are generous. So Teresa, skilled.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I also think it's important to be okay with being an agitator. You know, one of the things that we do is we really pride ourselves on giving a platform to unheard voices. So I found that in our over the years that we have taken so many risks, and you can't walk away or be afraid of that. You know, had we not, you know, we didn't know how we were going to renovate that 10,000 square foot building. We didn't know how we were going to find the money to renovate the building, but we walked in that assurance. And I'm so glad that we were willing to take that risk. The other thing I would say is, you know, early on, I knew that I don't care how avant-garde the work was on our stage, if we could not sustain it, then what were we doing? You know, we were really wasting folks' time. I distinctly remember a colleague, Ty Defoe, who said, if you're not planning for 8 generations deep, you're not planning big enough. And we really took that advice to heart. So financial management skills are very important. You know, I honestly, even before the artistic skills, I wanted to make sure that we were not self-serving, that this was not just an organization to serve my ego, but that it's something as a neighborhood resource center that it is available for generations to come. And so definitely financial management skills so that, you know,
If
will be
if the
around.
numbers don't work, nothing works, right?
That's right. That's right. And I do think it's important also to stay inquisitive. I was a National Arts Strategies Fellow where we had a chance to study at Harvard Business School. And I'm telling you, it was one of the most enriching and informative and educational experiences of my life because I always learned something new. You know, we talked about racial equity and biases, unconscious biases in way. And let me tell you, you know, I wrote the book on unconscious bias. So there were so many things that I learned that I was able to bring back to the team. And as an organization, we talk very openly now about racial equity and unconscious biases and all of those really hard conversations that none of us like to have, but we have to have because it's critical to the success of our organizations.
Yes, Jennifer, you did that as well, the fellowship.
Yeah, I did. That National Art Strategies program was amazing. It was amazing. When I did it, we went to 3 different universities and I learned so much from it. So I didn't bring that up in the evolution, but I'd recommend it to anyone who's who's listening here.
So I think that one of the things that take away to anybody thinking about being an executive director, first of all, start working in the theater. There are many paths to being the executive director. Learn as much, because you need to know about everything as the executive director. You need to know about marketing. You need to know about finances. You need to be sensitive to the artistic vision. So, you know, get in, start working, learn, and never stop learning. And that if you are lucky enough to lead an organization, stay curious and inquisitive, I think is really, you know, great advice. And that no day is the same. I mean, all of you probably relate to this. You know, I write my list out of what I'm going to do for the day and then poof, you know, because you come in and and you have to be flexible. But I think now 2 things that came up that I think are really moving from management to leadership. And I think they're really important things. And one was being an agitator, or, you know, having what my mentor calls the courage of your convictions, which she asked me what they were in a board meeting one time. And I thought, why are you picking on me? And I said, well, this is what I believe in. And, you know, I kind of got my redhead going. And she said, she sat back in her chair and laughed at me and said, I knew you had it in you. I wanted to see it. You must have the courage of your convictions in this field if you want to make a difference. Now, not everybody chooses to lead that way. This group is a group that does, but that comes sometimes at a cost, right? And you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, not being liked. Let's get into that part of the job. Who would like to take that?
Well, I'll tell you that we just had a Brave Conversations series with the philanthropic community. And, 60, only women of color who lead nonprofit organizations receive 0.6% of philanthropic dollars. 0.6% of philanthropic dollars. So this is systemic. And I'm excited that more organizations have a racial equity lens now, but we've got to hold those folks accountable. And so I say, yeah, you can't be scared. You got to speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. You've got to be able to walk with confidence in those conversations. And so I found that over the years that I've been the person who was reluctant to speak up, and I'm finding now that I have to speak up because typically leadership doesn't look like me, right? And to change that paradigm, I've got to show up unapologetically.
And I think that's true of an executive director across the board. Is more true than ever now. And sometimes that's with a board member too, when they're trying to take you off mission, or and it's like I think it's one of the skills that's been the hardest learned, to be able to speak your truth in a forthright manner, and also to the extent you can maintain the relationship. Sometimes the relationship is not worth saving, because the juice is not worth the squeeze, so to speak. But but in some cases, in a lot of cases, it is. But it takes real bravery. And I'm so glad you said, don't worry if your voice shakes, or in my case, I turn bright red, because that's what happens to me. That we are passionate people. We're in the passion business, and it's okay. Because that, it's, if we weren't passionate, the numbers, if you looked at this and did a feasibility study, you wouldn't, do it. We run on passion. And as far as I want to get people's reactions to the racial equity, because there was like a moment last summer when a lot of people had been doing this work for a long time, but some people just woke up and said, oh, okay. And so I think, one of the things I want to say is that it's great to do the thing, to show that you're doing it, but we need to get to the systemic issues and move away from the window dressing and have the even more difficult conversations. We need to go there and not be like, oh, I added 2 people, can I have a cookie? No, that's not what this is about. That's not what this ever was about. I'm probably going to get some feedback in the chat right now, but I think that and it's not that hard. It's about hiring different people. It's about advertising in different places. But I want to get people's take on that in this moment, being a leader in this moment when last summer and then moving forward, because one of my fears, and I feel one of my responsibilities, is to keep this conversation going and not let them take like my hand is on the wheel, my foot is on the pedal. And just because we're going back to work, we're still talking about this. And we need to be doing things. So Sheila, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, lots of thoughts. I completely agree that we need to turn a lot of the dialogue into actions. And we certainly have been working on that for a long time. Certainly the equity piece we worked on for longer than recognizing the issues of systemic racism, or our own ways that implicit bias has shown up, because we've always made sure something we've done is always paid artists, and we pay them all equally as employees, which is actually quite unusual for a small organization of our size. And it was very hard to get funding. That was actually something I had down about standing up for, is that artists should be paid. And Heather, you and I have talked about that. Yeah. But when it comes to, I'm a white cisgender heterosexual woman running an organization. So there's a trust issue that for lots and lots and lots of good reasons, doesn't automatically exist. So I have to spend time listening, being present, and being aware of how did I respond? These don't sound like action things, but they are. I've always been very civically engaged in the community board and very involved in the community, where we are now is between two neighborhoods that are preliminary people, mostly people of color. So it's a lifelong process. I could tell you the things that are checkbox things, but that's not what's important. What's important is the daily, having the difficult conversations, as Teresa was saying, acknowledging, calling each other in a respectful way. So wait a second, did you hear how you just say that or what you just said? Taking more time in hiring, which is a big thing because a lot of people of color are not automatically going to come to a white-led organization. So we need to look at that and take the time to make sure we're getting that great. I'm being very transparent and honest here.
Yeah. And then the networking that exists,
yes.
In inequitable ways. That's one of the things we're trying to do with our Andrew Lloyd Webber is pair people with mentors to give them the network because, I've been at these cocktail parties and watched the person walk over to the person and their son got the job, and nobody wants to, say, well, wouldn't you use your connections? But that's okay. But then acknowledge that we've been part of the system and where, it's exclusive from the get-go because the people that have the connections. And I think everybody's waking up to that. But it's not about just trying, it's about like staying, people are talking about being an ally or being an ally sounds very passive, right? It's like, no, we're in it to win it to the end. I think that's what I feel as a white leader, and I hope others will follow that we need to be, in that way.
Yeah,
Tiffany.
Well, I was just going to say that I also have found coming in as a woman of color in a predominantly white organization, that sometimes I have to remember that I come to this position with a different perspective, with a different background, and that I have to be okay with that, that sometimes it's not what everyone else is suggesting or thinking or the way everyone else thinks that it should go, but I'm bringing something slightly different to the table. I have a different point of view, and sometimes that's an uncomfortable place to be. And it is a lonely place to be sometimes, but I just have to sort of I have to live in that for a moment, and be okay with that. And I think it was something that I've had to learn in this position. And I'm sure that when women started taking over a lot of these positions from men, it was the same sort of thing. Everyone's looking at it from a different point of, from not my point of view, not my experience, and had to live a little bit in that discomfort. And I find that that I have kind of had to work on feeling okay with being in that space. But then you have to trust yourself. I think that you have to trust yourself that you might make a mistake, or you might have maybe wanted to make a different choice or something to that effect, but you have to remember that to some extent you were brought in because you had a different perspective, and you have to embrace that and be okay with that. So
and probably that different choice that you would make, we need. Jennifer.
Yeah, it's such a big topic that you raised with not much time left.
I know.
I just wanted to weigh in on a couple of things. I mean, there are all the actions we take as individual organizations. And I think a couple of key things that we've done at ACT are we've made a commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion through our values. So that means it impacts every decision that we make. Like your values, are the groundwork for all the decisions that you make organizationally, and have had a very intentional focus on our organizational culture, because we're also a predominantly white institution, legacy white institution. And if we're not welcoming to all, we could achieve racial, gender, any kind of diversity, but if we're not truly welcoming, it's not going to work. And then I also think it's important, I really think that as a field, right, we have such a focus on anti-racism now, especially over this past year, and with we see White American Theater and other organizations that have formed these are systemic issues that we are up against, and it's going to take all of us working collectively to move the needle. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
Absolutely. And Sheila.
I did want to add something, I almost typed in the chat, but is that so important to use our voices, like for advocacy. And that's some of where Heather, you and I have reconnected is the state level and the city level here, saying, and even city level, why isn't 15% of the funding going to BIPOC-led and BIPOC serving communities? Like the idea of reparations and funding. We have I feel like a responsibility to not be quiet as we need change.
And I think one of those, I'm sorry, were you going to say something, Teresa?
Yeah, I just want to add, please let me say this, and that is racial equity is such hard work. It's because it's ongoing, and it's not about who we are as executive directors. It's who we are as individuals. I have an amazing board chair, and she's a community leader who owned a bookstore in the neighborhood for like 30 years. And Emma said when she travels, she always leaves $5, $10, $20 underneath on her pillow for the person that's cleaning her room, because it's a way to say, I see you, I honor you. And that's the level of accountability that we've got to embrace. Not what we do when people are looking, but what we do behind closed doors when no one is looking. I feel like that's the litmus test for the racial equity work that we're doing.
So important. And that goes to not just the like window dressing of we did this production and this production, but what's really happening. We like to talk about it at the American Theater Wing is not a program, it's a principle. And how does that principle run through and we do a report card every year about like, okay, where we call them grows and glows. So where do we have glows and where do we have grows, and that being part of it is, it is a big topic. And I think that's kind of appropriate in a way because it helps, I think, the audience understand that one of the things about being an executive director or CEO is that you have to deal with these big topics and then the little topics of, does everybody have a bathroom key? You know what I mean? And I think that's a great sort of way to understand the sort of day-to-day of what we all deal with. While we think, about inclusion in the space, and Sheila and I have been part of this advocacy group, and happy to have everyone who wants to join us as we continue. We have to eat some Wheaties to keep going because we had a lot of legislator meetings. But one of the things when we think about this industry that I think is so important is so many people got left behind in our industry. And I think we need to advocate for the ecology, which is, this is including all the sort of freelance or income earners that, make the magic happen on stage, did not have an institution to help them through this. We're talking about the costume shops that are for-profits that fell through the cracks because they couldn't, get a PPP, or they couldn't, or they could get a PPP, but it was unclear about that. It's like, it's like the zippers makers, the beaters, I think we need to advocate for this ecology so that, when in this advocacy work that we've been doing, and Sheila and I ran into this a little bit, there's a quick, like everybody's running to get out of the theater and not get trampled. And it's like putting their oxygen mask on. And it's like, so we got, and thank goodness we got the Save Our Stages money. That's important. But as our pal, Brian Blythe, who runs the Costume Industry Coalition said, well, now we've got a car, but we've got no steering wheel, no interior. We're like, I'm going to date myself. It's the Fred Flintstone mobile, right? And we're pedaling it with our feet. So I think that's one of the things, that's a goal for me in coming back in the pandemic, is making sure that we take care of our industry. I'm going to take, there are a couple questions that came in the chat, but I think one of the things that comes through is you have to be a brave soul, to be, exactly. We didn't really talk about the self-care, but I think it's important because just what you were talking about, Tiffany, is that you're going through this whole internal dialogue that I have a different perspective and feeling uncomfortable. You got to get support so you can do that, And so one self-care thing that everyone does for themselves before we go to the questions.
weekly happy hour with colleagues.
That's a good one. Sheila,
Meditate.
that's a good one too. Teresa.
So this weekend I went tubing on the San Marcos River and lost my cell phone. It was liberating.
Wow, I think maybe you wanted to lose your cell phone because I do that all the time.
Exactly.
Little unconscious something going on. Jennifer.
A walk in the morning.
Walks are great. And I adopted a chocolate lab from the Humane Society during COVID. And that's, she's what gets me through, because I can be having like the worst conversations and she's lying in my feet, or she barks or growls at the right moment. She's, so it's like, yeah, so that's really important, because these roles, so much is on your shoulders and you're in the spotlight and you're getting judged. And sometimes leadership is doing the thing that everybody's telling you not to do because you know it's right. And knowing that you're getting noise at you. I mean, I think about some of the things that I started 10 years ago and people were like, don't do that, that's wrong. And now they're like, isn't that the best thing since sliced bread? And I think that is the difference between management and leadership, is the leader is the person that can keep moving forward despite naysayers. And I think that's super important. And I think more support of executive directors, and we should have a virtual happy hour, for people to tell their war stories, because we can't tell all of them on here. One of the questions that came is what's a moment where you had to admit you had done something wrong, and what was the aftermath of that moment? Anybody want to take that? While you're thinking, I'll tell a story. When I was the development director at the Delaware Symphony, I left a major donor out of the program, and I panicked and I went to the marketing director, and she was like, "It's okay, we'll do an insert and it will look even better." So it's like I admitted it, I found it, and then I went to a colleague and she helped me fix it, and there were no consequences. That's a small one. Somebody put in the chat that ED happy hour is, I think it's needed. So let's see if we can get that started, because I think we need a support group, especially coming back.
It is a Facebook group. I'm in it. It's really.
It is. Okay, great. Then put it in the chat.
I was just reflecting on one of the things that I hate doing is managing people. And I know that I've made mistakes where it relates to personnel, especially early on. I just found that, especially for people of color, there are some people who need nurturing, and it's hard to nurture when you have to lead at the same time simultaneously. And balancing that for me has been a challenge, because I'm such a type A personality where I want to get things done. And I'm a very private person also, and I often leave emotions out of, I try to leave emotions out, but sometimes people need nurturing. And I haven't been the best nurturer. And I know that, particularly for staff of color.
That is a wonderful quote. It's hard to nurture when you need to lead. And I think this is something that's particularly put upon women leaders. And I think that's why it's struggling, because we're supposed to get the job done and make everybody feel good. Men could just get the job done, or maybe not,
No, but that's a good point, Heather. Yeah. I've often said, I just want to do my freaking job. Just let me do my job without all of the other stuff.
But as a woman, they expect us to nurture them.
That's right.
And so, I think, working with staff, we all learn it's an ongoing process of what individuals need and how to do it. And, but I do think that's a pressure that you feel that is coming, that's being put upon us as women leaders. And, it's the same way when you were talking about being an agitator. Well, that's a complicated line for us women, but we're going to do it anyways. So I think that's a really good one. Any final thoughts on mistakes?
I would also share that the mistakes that I feel the most deeply and painfully were managerial staffing as well. And and I would say I'm maybe a little bit different in this way, Teresa, in that I am so transparent and don't smile so knowingly, Heather.
I'm just like, this is like a support group for me. So
and I've always wanted to be that way because I feel that I try to make it so it's more accessible to everyone, but sometimes there are people for whom that's too much.
Yeah.
And I also think that the whole nurturing thing is such a struggle because although people expect it, they also don't want it, and they do want it, or they get, it's something in that ED Facebook group. When my first post, somebody put, what is the one thing you wish you knew from when you started as an ED? And I said, and can I curse on here, or is that
yeah, it's fine.
No, it's fine. Okay.
I'm probably going to get in trouble for that, but what the heck? What do I
Well,
know? I just run the joint.
I cursed in the Facebook chat, but I'll fill it in with quotes. So I just said that no matter how great of a manager and executive director you have, your staff is going to talk poop about you. That's not the word I use. And they're, and you just have to accept it.
And you don't get invited to things. It's fine. No, I used to say I could put it not at this job. I have a wonderful staff at this job, really, truly, that I'm not kidding. But I used to, at another job that I had, I thought I could go around and put $1 million on everybody's desk and they'd still be like, screw you haven't done this for me. and and then you just know that that's part of it. And we're talking very honestly to the audience here. We're obviously getting something off of our chest, but this is a real thing, is that, you feel the responsibility of the family in a way. And there's, and it does end up feeling like a family, except sometimes we eat our young, but no, it is really hard to be that person, to be the leader. And I think what you're bringing up, Teresa, is those energies don't necessarily go together, right? To be a strong visionary leader and be a nurturer, those are, two different things. And that's not to say that you can't be kind and you're not going to respond when somebody is going through something. I mean, God, I'm the first person, if anybody starts crying, it's over here, I got to go, because I'll trigger cry so quick, about that. But it's like, I think it's hard for people that haven't had this job to understand just how much is on your plate. Just how, and like at the end of the day, it's like my husband said to me, at the end of the day, you could meet all your goals, you could do all this, and then somebody's going to say the napkin on table 25 at the gala was not folded correctly.
Exactly. And it's tough because you're caring for everyone else, and sometimes your own self-care takes a back seat. So there's nobody there to sort of, it's hard to find those times when you're like, well, nobody gave me a cookie today. Thank you very much.
They're not, and likely we're not going to get one. And I think that's hard to understand. But yes, it's like all those times where you blew this goal and you blew that goal and and it's like the period on page 6 is not dark enough, I think it's important. We're going over a little bit, but I think this is important for anybody that wants to go into the leadership role. And for me, I have to surround myself. I exercise every day, like we talked about. B, family, whatever your family is, however you make your family, really important. And you have to be enough for yourself. You have to, like every night, I literally say, did I advance the cause today? And if I think I did, I put my head on the pillow and went to sleep. Because we're our own worst critic anyways. We're going to say more than, but I think that's one of the biggest things about being a leader is your gut and your core. you have to trust, and really that's how you got to be fed, because it is hard. And look, there are well-meaning board members who all adore us, but it's not their first instinct to stop and say, you're the best thing. Thank you for doing that. I know how hard that was, and so it's got to come from within. And so your inner core has to be rock solid.
To add something to that, Heather, it's something that I have found over my decades of doing this is I'm finding I had to create a structure through which I got feedback that included the positive stuff, because we don't get it, and it is a void, and somehow within the organization, like making sure that is built, you have to build it for yourself almost, but that it exists, whether it's from a board member, usually from a board member.
Yeah,
I don't know how others have handled that. I'd be curious.
Yeah, does anybody else ask for, other than through a performance review?
In part, that's a little bit why you have your kitchen cabinet, a little bit to just be your touchstone.
Yeah.
And that's made up of, I have great colleagues and board members that I can just sort of gut check with, and it makes a huge difference just to have that person that goes, it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. You're great.
Okay.
And I'll speak up for you. And, in that moment, and it's about having that kitchen cabinet being your allies, especially because I think I'm not the person you hire to maintain anything. I'm going to come in and make it rain, and, and so in making change, it's like, it's hard because people want to do it the way they've always done it. And, and you're like, well, we're going to do it differently. And it's the right thing. So you do need those people. Well, I think this is a good place to end, that leadership isn't easy, but it's also, I look back at some of the hardest stuff, some of the stuff where I took real hits, for taking positions, and I see the change. And that is something you only get as an executive director, really. You get to be a part of the team, but that unique feeling that you shepherded that, you made that change, even if other people, like, that's the best thing is that you succeed when other people take credit for things that have been, doing. But the fact that something that was really hard is not really hard anymore. So as hard as it is to be an executive director, I think it is one of those places where you do have this unique opportunity to shape an institution and an industry and a world, quite frankly. With that, I thank you so very much for spending this time with me. I could spend so much more time. I think we do need to spend more time together. I admire all of you so much for your leadership. Stay strong. I'm only a phone call away, and I hope I can call you for advice too from time to time. So we are going to come out of this pandemic stronger, and we are going to make sure that the theater community looks and behaves differently, because it's not only about social justice, it's about economic survival of the field. It's about the art form. And I believe with leaders like you, we can work together to make the collective change that needs to happen. So thank you for spending this hour and 7 minutes with me.